All right, so welcome everyone. I'm glad to see a lot of familiar names in the sidebar as people are joining. This is our third in a three-part series on attracting and preparing teachers through innovation and choice. This one specifically focusing in on investing in innovation, choice, and change. And so we're glad you're here. I want to thank EdChoice for being our sponsor. And my name is Carrie Dank. I am the Executive Director for CEL. I am going to give our panelists a moment to introduce themselves. Before we do that, I'll just remind everyone, CEL is an outward-facing center within the University of Indianapolis, and we're focused on innovation change that benefits student achievement across Indiana. And my guess is at some point you have probably partnered with us, and we are eager to engage in the conversation and hear a bit more about the work that is happening, not just here in Indiana, but across the state. So if we just take a moment, I'll have each of our panelists introduce themselves, and we can start with Claire. And if you could too, please, if you would just explain what organization you're representing.
Sure, thank you, Carrie, and good afternoon, everyone. I know it's a sad day here in Indiana with the shooting, so I appreciate you joining on today for what I'm looking forward to the conversation with my fellow panelists and engaging in Q&A with you. My name is Claire Fidian-Green, and I'm very honored to serve as the president and CEO of the Richard M. Fairbanks Foundation. We're a private foundation based in Indianapolis, and our geographic scope is Indianapolis, but we do statewide research to the extent that it informs and can positively impact people living in Indianapolis. We have three focus areas: education, health, and the vitality of Indianapolis, which we define as economic drivers for the city. And the way that we conduct our work is by awarding grants, by commissioning and conducting research and evaluations, and by convening cross-sector partners who are all, through their own avenues, trying to address some of the complex challenges within our three focus areas. And then finally, we have a special emphasis through our work on programs, research, and initiatives that are trying to address disparities by race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. And then I do want to mention, because it may be relevant for our conversation today, that I am involved with the new Central Indiana Corporate Partnership and Indy Chamber initiative called Business Equity for Indy, which is focused on how the corporate community can help address racial disparities, specifically impacting Black and African American people in Marion County, and then more broadly in Central Indiana. And I'm co-leading one of 5 task forces, which is focused on how to address education and training and workforce development disparities for Black and African American individuals in Central Indiana.
Excellent. Thank you. Camila.
Good morning. Good to be with you all. My name is Camila Shahid Diallo. I'm the operating partner for the City Fund. We are a national nonprofit focused on K-12 education, and we make investments in cities where we're trying to partner with them to build innovative public school systems. Indianapolis is one of those cities that has done a lot of work and is really leading the country in a lot of the reforms that we've seen here. Before City Fund, I was at the Mind Trust, where I led strategy and community engagement for about 6 years. I'm a lawyer by training, so practiced law before that. I come to this conversation, one with my philanthropic hat on, but also as a mom of 2 girls, and that's how I got interested in education. I was practicing law when my oldest, who's now in high school, was going into kindergarten, and we were making decisions for her about school. And I was kind of smacked in the face with how many decisions and choices there were, and I just didn't have enough information to make those decisions. And so it really piqued my curiosity for understanding how the education landscape worked in Indianapolis, so that I could make good decisions for my child. But then it also makes me think about how all parents are making those decisions and what we can do in the philanthropy sector to make those choices more readily accessible and build awareness around them. So excited to dig in with you guys.
Excellent. Thank you. And Lindsay.
Hi, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm Lindsay Wheeler. I'm a senior program officer with the Walton Family Foundation on the K-12 education program team. The Walton Family Foundation is at its core a family-led foundation. Sam and Helen Walton founded the foundation nearly 3 decades ago with the belief that people can do extraordinary things when they're provided with opportunity. Our foundation works in 3 areas. The first is improving K-12 education. The second is protecting rivers and oceans and the communities that they support. And the third is investing in our home region of Northwest Arkansas and the Arkansas-Mississippi Delta. Our approach is really to partner with those who are closest to the problem because we believe that they're usually closest to the solution. On the K-12 education team specifically, our mission is to increase access to high quality K-12 education that puts opportunity in a self-determined life path close in the reach of children, especially those that are most in need. Just a little bit about myself. Prior to joining the Walton Family Foundation, most of my work in education was in the human capital space. I started my work as a 5th grade teacher in Phoenix, and from there supported principals at the Achievement Network and then worked at Arizona State University's Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College to design one of the first full-time residency models back at that time and really implement that residency model at scale. From there, I became executive director at Teach for America in Phoenix, where I supported core members that were teaching in traditional public and public charter schools, as well as working with alumni that were working across the education sector. At the Walton Family Foundation, the work that I do is really primarily focused from a national perspective, a national lens, creating enabling conditions for families and students to be able to have choices that put them on that path to opportunity and self-determination. Concretely, that means that I support a lot of our human capital work nationally across regions, as well as our work focused on creating new high quality schools across the country. I'm really happy to be here today.
Excellent. Thank you. So it is our intent to have this organized in such a way that it is an interactive exchange, an opportunity for our people within the audience to ask questions and engage in questions that they may have. The chat feature on the bottom is a great way for our audience members to pose the question, or if you raise your hand using the Zoom feature, when it comes time, we'll call on you. I think this will be a much more interesting and engaging opportunity for everyone if you participate. So I just want to encourage you to think about questions that you might have for our panelists. I'm going to start off this by asking a series of questions, and I'll let our panelists decide who's interested in responding to it. And I think that we have the Zoom set up so that it'll spotlight the person who's talking. There we go. So when you think about education reform and school improvement, or just change in general, can one of you talk about what you hope your work might accomplish from a K-12 perspective?
I'll start. So we are a new foundation that launched about 2 years ago, really with the idea of how do we partner with cities who are working to transform their public education systems. I think, as we all know, there are different types of schools that work, but they are pretty much a delivery model for delivering education. So we have a traditional district here in Indianapolis. We have the traditional district. We have charter schools. We have choice schools. We have private schools, but there are a lot of different school options, and parents are navigating those choices based on what their children need. And so there are a lot of cities that are working to say, how do we make sure that those choices are accessible to families and that they understand what the different choices are? So when we partner with cities, we're looking at what the current structure is in that city, what they're trying to create. And we believe that as many options as parents have to navigate to find what school is right for their child, we want to make sure that that families have as many choices and that there are options for them. So when we partner with cities, we're really trying to make sure that there's an ecosystem that creates that choice space, and that ecosystem can thrive, but they also have all of the components that we know a good school system needs. So do you have the talent that's needed? What supports are needed to help to build the talent? Do you have the schools? How do you create the schools that can serve these families? And then we look at how we're making progress. Test scores is one of those measures that we look at the schools that we're helping to create. How are students doing in those schools? And test scores are one way of looking at that, but it's not everything. We didn't get into this work to raise test scores. We really want to make sure that kids are leading meaningful, productive lives. And so how do we look at post-secondary outcomes as well to make sure that students are getting what they need from education?
I can build off of that. You'll probably hear that the three foundations here are fairly similar in our approaches. So our education focus area, just focusing on that part of our work, is really all about improving education and lifelong learning outcomes for people in Indianapolis. And we always start by looking at the data, which unfortunately is not very good for too many people in Indianapolis, especially children from low-income households and adults from low-income households, and then also Black and Hispanic students and adults. So one of the goals within our education focus area is to try to drill down based off of what the research tells us, or maybe what innovative models with some preliminary outcomes tell us is actually making a difference to try to improve those outcomes. So I'll give you a couple of examples. The research is very clear that teachers and principals make an enormous impact on the learning outcomes of students in K-12 classrooms. So if you have an above average teacher, you're going to see more than a year's growth for some students. And if you have a below average teacher, you're going to see the reverse. So it's really important to make sure that all of our teachers are well trained and supported, not only going into the classroom, but also by the principal and the building in which they are located, so that they are being maximized for their success as teachers. It's also very important to have great principals and school leaders in the building that are creating a strong culture, that understand how to support their teachers, whether they're novice teachers or more experienced teachers, and also, of course, the students and families that they're serving. So that's an example of how the research guides our grant making and what we are trying to accomplish. And we can go into more detail later on about some of the specific grants we've made in Indianapolis, Carrie, that might be of interest to the audience. One thing I do want to talk about that we've been working on pretty intensively since 2016 is also the linkages between K-12 and higher education and the workforce. So we have been funding and engaging in modern youth apprenticeship, which is based off of the Swiss model. So it's starting with juniors in high school. How do we ensure that they're not only getting their K-12 education for the last 2 years, but also work-based learning experiences that translates into a pathway either onto further higher education or directly into a career. So that's a newer initiative that we've been focused on trying to connect the dots between K-12, post-secondary institutions, and the workforce.
Thank you.
Great. And I shared a little bit about the K-12 team, our mission, but what we are really looking for is to see breakthroughs in student success, and that students are able to access opportunity and self-determination, and there are a variety of choices along that road. And so our current strategy really focuses in 3 areas. The first is increasing achievement and opportunity. So we believe in the power of individuals and communities to shape their futures. And that's why we plan to do even more to foster the ingenuity that lives within these communities and to support community-demanded, community-driven, and led change. These efforts, so this is a lot of our place-based work. So many of you are familiar. We've worked in Indianapolis. We've worked in a number of other cities. We're going to be working in even more places, and in a way that looks to deeply partner with communities moving forward as well. The second area is to foster diverse and durable coalitions for the future, because we believe that for change to happen and to take root and really be long lasting, that people need to have a say in the aims and the means. And so our work is to help support the campaigns, the platforms, and the tools that will translate that voice and that vision into systemic solutions. So strong, diverse coalitions can advance policies that will allow promising and community-demanded educational models to thrive. And the third area that we work in is innovation, specifically accelerating breakthrough innovation in education. Courageous and bold thinking is really needed to address critical, sort of long-standing and entrenched challenges in education. And we think that with more dedicated resources, that we can continue to support and accelerate entrepreneurs and innovators that have new ideas, pluralistic solutions that can really meet the needs of diverse and changing communities.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. So on this call, we have folks from colleges, universities, ed prep programs across the state, some in Indianapolis and some outside of Indianapolis. Can you think a little bit about, like, so the work that you're doing, what's the implication, or what should teacher preparation programs be thinking about how they fit into your work?
I can start on this one. So, you know, I think that first that teachers are foundational to seeing this path of opportunity for students. They really are at the heart of the opportunity. And so I think that teacher preparation programs have a huge opportunity. A couple of points that I'll make. One is that we've really been seeing learning models, you know, schools, we call them schools, but really we're seeing a whole variety of new learning models evolve and flourish across geographies. And I think there's a real opportunity to build, like, how we think about human capital, training, support structures alongside those learning models. And I think teacher prep programs and institutes of higher ed have a major role and can really be important in this. So, you know, that is one thing to think about, training teachers for a variety of educational models and setting them up so that they can, they can be successful in the schools of the future. Let me stop there. I think others probably have comments.
Yeah, as I mentioned when I was providing a brief overview of our work, our interest in teachers is extremely strong because of the research that shows just how critical it is to have high quality teachers in every classroom and every school in our country and certainly within our state. So I'll give you an example of some of the grant work we have done. We do provide funding for alternative teacher preparation programs like Teach for America. We've been funding them ever since they came to Indianapolis. We have also partnered with traditional schools of education, the most recent being Marian University. We provided them with a planning grant when they wanted to redesign and reconstitute their school of education. And part of that planning grant was to go and study OECD economies that have really strong teacher preparation programs and take those lessons back into their redesign efforts for their newly launched, what they call their Educators College. So a couple of examples of concrete changes that they made were making sure that the preparation for elementary teachers included strong content background, not just pedagogy, so that elementary teachers were very strong in understanding math, English, et cetera. The second is having a year-long residency program. It was interesting to hear about Lindsay's work. So that's something that the Marian Educators College has adopted, that before you can graduate, you actually have to have a rigorous year-long residency program with a high-quality teacher providing you with clear, structured support and mentoring so that you learn how to be an effective teacher through a hands-on approach guided by an experienced teacher. And then the other element is that rather than waiting until kind of year 3 or year 4 or year 5, depending on how long the program is, to get in front of students, you're actually doing that starting in your first year. So that's just some examples of what Marian learned through planning that they have now implemented in their new Educators College. And we provided the planning grant funding as well as some startup funding to get that school launched as they started to enroll students and focus on getting towards sustainability just through enrollment.
I agree with all of those things that Claire and Lindsay have shared. The only thing I would add is just doubling down on getting students in schools as soon as possible to really understand the challenges that they will face. So much about preparing teachers for the classrooms of today and tomorrow is getting inside the schools and seeing what the challenges are. And so much of that is beyond pedagogy. Our work focuses largely in urban communities where there are high poverty environments. And so it is so much of what the teachers face, as you all know, is beyond just the academic instruction. And so how are teachers prepared for all of the challenges that they will face, in addition to making sure that students are the teaching and learning that is the core of the work, but just making sure that they are also prepared to address all of the other challenges that they will face. And the sooner they're able to do that, the better. We've partnered, one of the cities where I oversee our investments is Camden, where there's similar partnerships between the schools of education and residency programs. And the benefit of that coordination between a traditional teacher prep program and an alternative licensure program is that we're seeing a combination of the best of both of those programs, where you're really valuing what comes from the traditional teacher prep programs and then marrying that with some of the residency components. And then one other thing I'll just say on that is getting teachers or young people interested in teaching as soon as possible. And there are some investments that we've made in an organization called Center for Black Educator Development, where they use a partnership model where college students are training high school students to really serve as apprentice teachers in a summer program, so that as these high school teachers or high school students are going through high school and having this hands-on experience, they're starting to consider education as a career for themselves, where they may not have been thinking about that before. But getting that early exposure to what teaching is like gives them an opportunity to explore a path toward education that they may not have considered.
That's very interesting. You know, when you think about schools, right? Schools have been around for a very long time, and teachers have been around for a very long time. And, you know, we all went through first grade, and there's still a first grade classroom that, you know, kids are in today. So it's easy to think that schools of 10, maybe 20 years ago, right, are very similar to schools of today. And I think if you're a teacher in those schools or a principal in those schools, you're keenly aware that school has changed. Schools of today are really not the schools of yesterday, even though in many ways are structured in the same ways. Can you talk a bit about, you know, what do you think the implication is, or what should higher ed be thinking about when it comes to the fact that schools have changed and changed pretty dramatically?
Yeah, I can start. I was starting to get at this with my last comments, which, you know, I think that we are going to continue to see school models evolve. I think we're seeing that in traditional districts. We're seeing that in charters. We're seeing micro schools and out of system options. We're seeing homeschooling collaboratives. We're seeing a whole host of models in which students are learning and being prepared for a global economy and, you know, an ever-changing world. And so I think that, having worked in the Teachers College, I know that there are some there's really intentional focus around content, around pedagogy, and this connects with some of Camila's points. I think the more you can build a really authentic and grounded and give teacher candidates access and exposure to many models during their training, I think that equips them. I also think that embedding explicit skills and mindsets in training for teacher candidates is important and will serve them across many, many learning models. And so, for example, you know, some of the most important mindsets and skills that I think teacher candidates can benefit from developing, given the types and the shifts of school models. One is ability to collaborate and work together. Staffing structures in schools, there still are schools that have a model of a teacher in a classroom, but there is much more team teaching. There's fluid staffing models where really the student is the center and the instructors flow fluidly, even through an open space. We're seeing a lot more models like that now. So ability to collaborate and work together with others that might have differences than you towards goals, that's actually really hard to do. And I think that it can be practiced, and I think there are intentional skills that can be developed around that. The second is resourcefulness. I think that teachers are sort of bombarded right now with online curriculum and tools and resources that are available, and ability to sort of vet through those and not create the wheel and identify high quality options to utilize and implement, I also think is a really important skill. And I think prioritization and reflection, ability to set goals clearly and know that it is your job as a teacher to reflect and grow and do that intentionally over time. That is a skill set that can be fostered and that is important regardless of the school or the learning model in which you are teaching. So I think all of that is important. Those are just a few things. So, and then I do think the authentic and varied opportunities. One thing that comes to mind is Arizona State University is implementing a new or next educator workforce model right now. So they have sort of acknowledged this fact that many schools of the future are not going to have a teacher with a classroom just in that ratio set up. And so their student teachers are placed only in schools that have more innovative learning models, at a minimum team teaching, but you see all types of staffing models, and their teacher candidates have more than one student teaching experience. So they have field experience, and then in their senior year residency, it's not one classroom all year. They actually have the opportunity to be in a couple of different settings to give them that sort of authentic experience and development as they're learning and preparing.
I can add on a couple things to what Lindsay has shared. So certainly the pandemic has made this crystal clear in all of our minds, but you probably know this and have known this for a long time, that there's significant mental health and social emotional learning needs of children, which absolutely impacts their ability to pay attention and learn within the classroom. So of course that impacts what a teacher's job is and what their teacher preparation ought to be. One thing we had been funding prior to the pandemic, but has become more important according to what we're hearing from our schools, is evidence-based substance use prevention programs, which are also social emotional learning programs that are taught by teachers, and they're embedded into the curriculum, and they're part of the weekly or daily schedule, depending on the curriculum that's chosen. So it's been interesting going through that initiative. It's one of the largest initiatives we've ever funded. We're funding 55 schools, about 170,000 students. It will be reached by the time it reaches scale. And it's not a skill set that was necessarily explicitly taught during teacher prep programs. So something I would think about if I were preparing future teachers is, do we need to be embedding that within our teacher training curricula to make sure that teachers are equipped with how do you provide SEL or embed SEL curricula into your programs. The second thing I would talk about, of course, the pandemic, again, with many teachers having to literally overnight begin to teach online when they may have had 3 or 4 snow days or inclement weather days throughout the year when they were doing virtual instruction, was just how much of a lift and a challenge that was. Now, the silver lining of the pandemic, I think, has been spurring more of the innovative models that Lindsay was talking about. So I think there's an opportunity to think about, how do we actually embed virtual instruction into our regular instruction when things go back to normal, whatever that is going to look like? I think that can do a couple things. It can augment what's happening during the regular school day schedule. It can assist with summer learning. It can assist with when there are limited resources in a school or a particular geographic area that perhaps you can leverage virtual learning resources. So those are other things I would think about, ensuring that teacher candidates know how to take advantage of all of the amazing array of tools out there. But to Lindsay's point, making sure that you know how to vet and find the high quality ones that are actually going to be helpful to teachers.
One thing I'll add is just as a teacher prep program, I think it's so important to understand the different school models that your students will be entering, because they are different, and that impacts the experience that pre-service teachers will have. And so to prepare students for environments where they may be getting feedback in a way that was different than it had happened originally, and that coachability and flexibility, understanding where they have the opportunities to lead, all of those things may be different in different school models. In the charter sector, feedback may look very different. We work with a lot of schools where feedback is daily. And if you are in a traditional school, you may get feedback once a month. but making sure that the students are prepared to enter those different environments so that they're then able to respond to what those different environments look like. They know what is expected of them, and that they do build those softer skills on coachability, grit, determination, all of those things that will help them survive in what may be a very challenging environment that they thought about in theory, but then the lived experience may feel very different.
Yeah, I think about all of the children, it's all of the people, right, who have been sort of adversely affected because of the pandemic and because of events in the news, and for many of those children, particularly children coming out of really challenging environments, the best connection they have is with the teacher, and if the teacher is limited in their ability to only manage students or to conduct discipline, you miss such a great opportunity to help build better, stronger students. And so I think all of your points are spot on. As a profession, we have been talking about the need to increase minority participation in teacher prep programs and to employ more teachers in school, more diverse teachers in schools. And I went through a teacher prep program in the very early 90s, and that was a topic of conversation. Here it is, 2021, and I don't know that we've made good progress, right? You look at the data, it's pretty appalling. I mean, there's a lot of room for improvement, and so I'm interested in hearing from each of you. If you had the magic wand, what would you do to make a change? How would you help diversify the workforce?
Well, I'll start. And when this is something I think about a lot from my own experience as a little girl growing up in Indianapolis schools. And I remember desperately wanting Mrs. Brown to be my third grade teacher because she was the only Black teacher in our entire elementary school. And so I think we know from an anecdotal place the importance of representation, but we've all seen the data on how key having teachers of color is to students of color. And so I think that one thing from a teacher prep program perspective is really thinking about how do you attract more diverse students so that you have that pipeline of diverse teachers that are going to be serving the students that they will face. And a lot of that starts with what a lot of universities are doing, which is really thinking more about diversifying their own institutions. That also, if you are a diverse institution, you then attract diverse candidates, diverse faculty and staff, and it starts to be part of the conversation that is not only like a nice to have, but it is key to being effective in your role. It doesn't mean you have to be a person of color, but just understanding that that is going to be a key requirement of you as a leader to be able to navigate conversations across difference so that students can learn. So one, I think it just starts with having the conversation, thinking about your institution and how you can attract more diverse candidates. And then I think also just being open to thinking about what we value differently. I think as educators, think about the priority that we're putting on someone's educational background because we know that that matters, but we also can think about and prioritize the value of shared lived experience and what that means to the students that you're serving. So I think thinking just holistically about all of the requirements of an educator in that school building and making sure we're tapping into each of those things and valuing them for what they, how the students will benefit.
I'll just add, I mentioned that research and evaluation is a core part of our work, and I can drop in the chat. There's buku amounts of research on this topic, and just one that I pulled out that I'll share is that students, particularly Black boys, benefit academically from having same-race teachers, not only in the short run in terms of their test scores, absences, suspensions, but also the long run, high school graduation, college enrollment, and college completion. So there's a lot of data, and it's not only for Black boys, it's actually having one same race teacher, regardless of your race, actually has an impact positively on your test scores, according to the research. So it is critically important. To your question, Carrie, about if you could wave a magic wand, I mean, certainly having the resources to pay to go to an educator's college is very important, especially given the state of teacher pay when you graduate. A student may decide they're interested, but they want to pursue a computer science or other degree so that they can have a higher paid job. So certainly compensation, which is always in the news, and I think just in the past couple of days it's been in the news here in Indianapolis, is a really critical factor in that. So how do you alleviate that? You fully cover the cost of their education and provide that as an incentive to try to get more people to become education majors. In our look into this and just talking with state partners, there are a lot of resources through the state. One example is the William A. Crawford Minority Teacher Scholarship, and there's often money left on the table every year. So one example would be making sure that teacher prep colleges research all the available state resources that there are, and then help communicate about those and have targeted outreach to students of color in high school to make sure they're even aware that this is an opportunity for them as they're thinking about the next step post high school.
Yeah, I would just kind of second the comments that have been shared so far. I think that there are sort of I think that institutional and systemic racism are at play in what we're seeing in a lack of diversity in the teacher workforce. I also think that there are concrete kind of tactical and operational actions that institutes of higher education teacher prep programs and schools and districts can be taking. You know, one related to recruitment, as Camila was discussing, you know, even setting goals around building diverse pools and getting creative, like Claire was saying, in partnership with community colleges. We've seen some real movement in partnership with community colleges and recruiting to teacher prep programs. We're running a study right now of early pathways into teaching that start in high school and bring attention to teaching and the opportunity for diverse candidates to kind of, you know, be involved. I also think that, you know, there is recruitment. There is also, it is of critical importance to ensure that programs training teachers are inclusive and that, you know, the environments in which teachers are working, you know, value diversity, equity, and inclusion, because, you know, that's just critical once you have a diverse sort of pool of teacher candidates or a diverse workforce. One piece that has been discussed quite a bit as full-time residencies have become, you know, more instituted more across institutions. There is a challenge to ensure you're able to recruit a diverse pool, which is students that need to work when they are in college, or, you know, so making sure that all the elements of your program actually are inclusive and are welcoming and, you know, kind of getting creative in recruitment and retention efforts, I think is critical. One thing I wanted to share is that, you know, teacher diversity is a critical part of the Walton Family Foundation strategy. In 2019, we launched a teacher diversity initiative in partnership with New Schools Venture Fund with $3.5 million. And that provides grants of, on average, $200,000 to early stage and new organizations and programs that are committed to recruiting, training, and supporting a more diverse teacher educator workforce. So I do think that there are local solutions and there are organizations and entrepreneurs that are really thinking about this issue, and we're really excited with what we're seeing from that initiative.
Yeah, I think it's pretty common for different entities to kind of take the position that it's not my fault, right? If I'm the school leader, I didn't get the application from a minority applicant, or if I'm the teacher prep program, they didn't apply to my college or university. Like, who, in your opinions, like who ought to be responsible for this? Like who should take it on and say, hey, this is something that I'm going to really drive to? Is it the government? Is it higher ed? Is it the teachers union, the schools? What do you think?
I think we all have a role to play. And I think it doesn't change unless we all say, what are we willing to do differently in order to see that change? So we, as an organization, we've granted in our first 2 years, $200 million to organizations across the country. But we said for ourselves, if we want our investment practices to look different, we have to hold ourselves to a different standard. And so we set internal measures of ways we wanted to hold ourselves accountable. And so we said that a majority of our investments by our third year, 2023, will be in organizations that are led by Black or Latinx leaders. We know that those are the majority of students that we serve, and that is not the case now. It's probably about 20%, but we put a stake in the ground so that we have something that we're measuring toward. We believe you measure what you value, and so if we value that, then we have to say that we're going to do something different. And to Lindsay and Claire's points earlier, there are ways that organizations have done this to diversify their workforce, their applicant pools, setting criteria for diversifying your faculty, diversifying your incoming students. All of those are efforts that will change the outcome. There's, little by little, but if we're taking our own steps to say, what can we do? I think that's the only way that we can collectively make a difference.
I agree with that. I mentioned when I did the intros that I'm part of this Business Equity for Indy initiative, CICP and the Indy Chamber. One of the other task forces is focused on hiring and promotion and helping companies identify when they might have unconscious bias in their hiring practices. So if all of the colleges and universities on this call haven't done something like that, really systematically going through every step of your process to figure out where might there be some barriers that you've introduced in the process without even realizing it, would be incredibly valuable in helping to open up the pool of potential candidates that perhaps you weren't accessing for reasons that you weren't even aware of. So having an outside perspective come and do that deep dive would be very valuable, I think, for teacher prep programs.
So
I don't have much to add. I agree. Everyone has a role, and so I don't think I have much to add on top of what the others have shared.
So in Indiana, we're a choice-friendly state, right? Like, there's no other way to look at this. We've got charter schools and voucher schools, and magnet schools and innovation schools, right? If you name a form of school choice, I think we have it. So what do you think about what do you think the role of higher ed and teacher prep programs ought to be around sort of responding to the fact that the types of schools have changed? Is a teacher just a teacher and it doesn't matter? Or should teacher prep programs be thinking about the types of teachers they're building based upon the types of schools that might be hiring them?
I can start on that. So I'm not sure. So I think that teachers change where they are. Many teachers change where they're working throughout their career. So I'm not sure that it is the best strategy to say this teacher candidate is going to teach in a traditional public school and this teacher candidate is going to teach in a public charter school. Let's train them differently. I don't think that is a good approach. Rather, I think that taking a step back during teacher preparation and helping teacher candidates to sort of get a lay of the land to build their schema for the education sector will help them to have the ability to exercise leadership and kind of make meaning of whatever environment they are working in and kind of understand what that is. What does it mean to teach in a public charter school? Well, how is that, and to kind of draw connections and connect the dots. Just a personal anecdote, when I was in grad school, I went to grad school after teaching, and I took a course, Introduction to Education Policy and Management. And that whole semester, I kept thinking to myself, I have that before I was a teacher. While it wasn't directly about how to teach, it really helped me to make meaning of what I was seeing sort of at the ground level in a classroom, but from that bird's eye view. And, think about when you're training, medical professionals, they don't start and just learn about the specialty in which they're going to be working. They learn broadly about all the sciences, and you sort of build a broad schema before you narrow in. And I think there could be some real value to that for teachers, especially with how sort of political and controversial certain pieces of education reform have become in the media. And I think, so that would be sort of my perspective.
I would just add, we fund traditional district schools, public charter schools, and private schools through our work in Indianapolis. And Carrie, you said this earlier, there's not that much difference. I mean, a school is a delivery model, as I think Camila said in one of her opening comments. And a teacher's role, unless you're in a 100% virtual environment or some of these flipped classrooms that Lindsay was describing, and there aren't that many of those here in Indianapolis, and perhaps that's true, perhaps that's not true in other parts of the state, but my guess is they're pretty much all the same or similar. So there isn't too much around making sure you know your content and your pedagogy, making sure that you're prepared for the different environments in which you might find yourself, whether it's urban, rural, or suburban, the different student populations you'll be faced with. Those things are going to be fairly consistent, I think, within a teacher prep program. But to some of the earlier questions you had, Carrie, as part of our panel conversation, this is a different world. And so unfortunately, I think the burden is on teachers to keep doing more. And so making sure that the teacher prep programs are factoring in SEL training, the policy landscape, and all the other things they need to know just to be equipped to survive once they're actually placed in the classroom setting.
I was talking with the principal the other day, and I was asking her what was the most important, thinking about this panel, what were the most important things that that she addressed with her teachers. And she doubled down on coachability and just resilience. And I think that the resilience comes from the fact that you may know what you're trying to communicate, but if the student isn't getting it, then that's where the challenge comes in. And I think it is there's nothing harder in my experience, there's no harder job than teaching. And so making sure that people are prepared that they're going to face challenge in that, and then how do you push through those challenges and ask for the supports that you need. The one thing I will say about different environments, though, is there may be different supports within different environments, and having an understanding of that and how do you lean on and pull from those supports is a critical thing that I think teacher prep programs can prepare their teachers for.
So I just want to remind everyone that if you have questions or ideas or thoughts you want to share with our panelists, to put those in the chat, and we'll try to put those out there so that your question is asked. I know that Cody Stanley from Tinley has got some comments in the chat where he's talking about the importance of preparation in an urban environment, particularly in a charter that's in an urban environment, and Tinley's willingness to collaborate. And I think this idea that when you have a district, right, and you're a teacher prep program, it's pretty easy to go to the singular district and have access to multiple charters or multiple schools. In a charter environment, right, you've got each of them sort of independently managed, and the same is true with innovation schools. And so it becomes a little bit harder because you have to have a relationship with each of those schools. Lindsay, you talked a little bit about some of the different things that were going on in Arizona. Do you have any thoughts, or if you have any thoughts around how schools can be effective at trying to forge those relationships with schools that are maybe different or managed outside of a district? Any thoughts there?
It is a challenge, if you are in a fragmented landscape, especially if there are sort of standalone charters that you want to be able to prioritize. I think that staffing your own institution in a way that enables you to do this is the key. And so if this is a priority, if it's a priority to ensure that your teacher candidates have access to a variety of learning models, thinking about the team that you need or the staff members you need to help to build those relationships and create those access points. It is easy to work with one head of HR in a district and secure teacher candidate placements. But how ASU did it, years ago was that junior year experience was in the charter sector and senior year experience was in districts. And so they had staffed accordingly. I'm sure it has changed and continues to evolve. But I think my response is just there's not a silver bullet other than just recognizing it's going to be a little bit more burdensome. You could probably use some technology to help you centralize and streamline things. But I do think it should be a priority and probably needs to be staffed accordingly if that's something that you want to prioritize.
So, if you look at school reform, you've got a lot of foundations and institutions which are pushing for a lot of those reforms. In your opinion, has there been enough investment that has been made in teacher prep programs? But I think a lot of the investment's gone to traditional, to K-12 schools, right?
Yeah, our focus has been K-12 schools, and so that's where most of our investment has been. But I will say that so when I think about our city-based investments, we partner with a city in Indianapolis. Those investments are primarily through the Mind Trust, and we rely on our local partners to think about their whole ecosystem. And so while school creation may be one of those things, so investing in the creation of more charter or innovation schools, talent is always a component of that. And local partners for us typically dictate what that talent investment looks like in their city. I think we've seen a lot of expansion in Indianapolis from solely alternative teacher prep programs like TFA to really starting to partner with traditional education prep programs as well, for the benefit of that collaboration. We've seen that in Indianapolis. I'm seeing that in other cities as well. And I think the benefit of that is that the traditional prep programs are where the bulk of teachers are coming from. And so if you're not making investments there, then there are a ton of teachers that you're never going to touch, and they are going to be interacting with students. And so we're trying to really think more expansively with our local partners around, yes, the alternative teacher prep programs are great, but are there opportunities to partner with the traditional teacher prep programs as well, so that the impact can be greater?
Yeah, and I think there have been some significant investments in teacher prep, and I think that that's really important, because if you want to see high quality schools and growth of new schools, that, you know, teachers are the fuel. So at the Walton Family Foundation, since 2015, 15,000 teachers, principals, and education leaders have come through programs that we have supported with grant funding. And so, you know, we invest in teacher preparation and also in principal support and development too, because we see those elements of human capital as just a critical component to providing opportunity for children.
And I'll just add that I mentioned earlier that we have partnered with both the non-traditional as well as teacher prep programs, but with all grant making, there's kind of at least two hurdles you have to get through with a funder. One is, does it align with their priorities? And the second is this actually a strategic priority for that organization? Is there strong belief and buy-in and leadership from the leadership, which it includes the president, executive director, CEO, and the board of directors, depending on the type of organization. So those are really two important criteria for us as we consider grant initiatives. And Marian University was the driver behind wanting to reform the way that it approached teacher preparation. So that was a natural partnership and alignment because of their passion for how to change the way that they were preparing teachers.
I think your language around an ecosystem, I think is a good way of thinking about it. And I don't know that that always really is what happens in practice. I think a lot of times, you know, everyone kind of thinks about their own silo. I was really interested in the beginning. You talked about an effort where it was trying to use my language, trying to seed the teacher pipeline early, right? Like kind of not waiting until they're senior and making their applications to college, really trying to get ahead of it. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Sure. There's the organization that we've made the investment in is called Center for Black Educator Development. And it was launched by a former principal of a charter management organization called Mastery. And what he was seeing is, he's an African-American male, and he lived the experience of the data that Claire shared about the importance of having, for his Black male students, of having Black teachers. And so they started doing a residency program with college students who were not in the School of Education, but college students that were mentoring. And so they would come in and they would mentor students that were in their high school, the high school that he was the principal of. And from that, he expanded and built a program where he was bringing college students who may not have been in the School of Education to train, to teach students in their high school. They would get some college credit for it, but they were not in the School of Education. He saw that a lot of those college students then ended up becoming teachers. They went through an alternative certification program, but it started to build that pipeline. He then took that a step lower, and then started bringing high school students in to partner with the college students. And so it's just building this pipeline that they are now working in Philadelphia is where they started. They're now working in 4 different states to do the same type of program. And it really gets people who may not have considered teaching for many of the reasons that people think about it, like, oh, I want to get a career that's going to be more lucrative, or things that maybe perception barriers that are keeping diverse or leaders of color from pursuing education, but it's taking out that barrier, giving people the experience, and creating a pathway that they may not have considered.
So, we've got a lot of people on this webinar, and I think probably what was a driver for a lot of them was the fact that we just see fewer people enrolling in teacher prep programs. We see fewer teachers entering the workforce. Can you talk a bit about some innovative practices or strategies that maybe you've seen elsewhere that have driven more people into the workforce, or more people into considering teaching as a profession?
I'll share just a couple of things that a couple of our city-based partners are doing from this ecosystem perspective. Like I shared, we invest in a nonprofit in the city, and they've done things like loan forgiveness for teachers to make sure that they can actually pursue and stay in teaching when finances may become an obstacle. Schools of education, they've supported them in recruiting more diverse candidates to enter their school. So that's oftentimes involves going to HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, to recruit teachers for graduate programming. Also funding opportunities for existing teachers to get additional training. So getting master's degrees or graduate degrees in education that increases their earning potential. And then there's just other efforts that we've invested in to help build the pipeline. But I think it really just is involved getting creative about knowing where you're trying to go, and then really trying to look to identify what are the barriers, and then trying to find ways to work around those.
I'll add that one of the things that I think Teach for America does extremely well is they have a very, very structured and rigorous approach to going out to campuses and recruiting to get folks into their program, that I think teacher prep programs could learn from, is making sure you're starting early. You have a very intentional, well-resourced approach to going out and finding future applicants. One initiative that I've learned about recently that will be coming to Indianapolis through the National College Football Playoff Foundation is Go Teach, which gets college athletes who are also education majors to then mentor with high school athletes and encourage them to consider applying to become education majors. So I think you have to do the personal outreach to try to get people actually interested and help them understand what is it actually like to be a teacher. If you think about most of us in high school, you only know what you know, you don't know what you don't know. And so if you don't get that exposure, it's going to be hard to imagine yourself in that kind of a career. So that is, I just think the more creative you are around your recruiting strategies, the better. The second is there's also retention. So there's a lot of turnover within the first 5 years. And something that we haven't yet really talked that much about on this panel is making sure that you're creating career development opportunities that don't take your best teachers out of the classroom and put them in administrative roles, but really creating career ladders within the school that gives ongoing professional development and opportunities for career advancement, but you're still working with teachers. An initiative that we have funded in Indianapolis Public Schools is Opportunity Culture, which is teacher-led models for really flipping the classroom and using paraprofessionals and also teachers that teach across multiple classrooms. So you identify your best math teacher in the building, and using technology or different classroom schedules, you get that teacher in front of more students, and then they mentor other teachers to help improve their practice. And they get a stipend for that. They get a bonus for the extra work that they're doing. So it provides them with motivation and the desire to want to stay in that school building. So I think we just have to be creative across not only recruitment, but also what we're doing to retain our talent in classrooms.
The only other thing I would add is just, and this might speak a little bit to the question that Jeremy entered in the chat around rural school districts and what they can do to attract quality and diverse teachers. You know, we have seen some interesting models that are sort of grow your own type models. And if I'm thinking about that with the hat of a teacher preparation institute on, or a program on, I would think about building deep relationships within a community, within the district or the schools in the area. Often there's a pipeline of folks that are in paraprofessional roles or similar roles that are, you know, maybe interested in becoming a teacher, and how can teacher preparation programs sort of meet that need and provide alternate pathways into teaching for, you know, for those that may already be in school buildings and, you know, just have talent and interest and dedication to students. So, you know, we're actually conducting a study right now of sort of a scan of grow your own type of programs across the country, because we do think that that can be an effective way to build a diverse teacher workforce and really ground it in, you know, community-centeredness as well.
So I think Claire kind of touched on this in part of her opening, but in 2013, Amanda Ripley wrote this book called The Smartest Kids in the World. And for a lot of people, you know, it was their first opportunity to really think about what schools looked like outside of the United States and how they operated and what their outcomes were. Should educator prep programs be thinking about what's happening outside of America?
Absolutely. We have funded some work starting in 2016, taking a look at teacher preparation programs in Indiana and then more broadly in the United States, and comparing and contrasting with countries like Finland and Canada, which are known for their very strong teacher preparation programs. And that was precisely what the planning grant to Marion was to do, was to go and really dive into those and see what lessons could be translated back into the United States. So certainly it's a tenet in business, and I don't see why it should be any different for teacher prep programs, is to always be looking around and see what are others doing and what can we be replicating with our own programs.
Looks like we've got a question in the chat. When it comes to teacher prep recruitment from diverse populations, are there any great models from HBCUs that higher eds can look at as a model? I think that you know, the idea of trying to attract diverse talent is a challenging one, right? And I think that there's not any easy answers. And I appreciated the thoughts around this idea that, you know, it's got to be sort of collective responsibility. And I think that this idea that we need to sell the teaching profession to young people, I think those are all really sort of relevant and important. Do you think there's anything that higher ed could be doing to more broadly kind of position the teaching profession in a way that, you know, is exciting and energizing in a way that maybe isn't happening now, or maybe it's only happening in small pockets?
I think that there's so much of this, I think, just starts with conversations with the communities that you're trying to reach. And so there's an organization called New Leaders that is really thinking about how do they diversify the teacher workforce. They started a partnership with Morehouse College for this thing. And they didn't know what the answer was going to be at the beginning. But I think starting that conversation, saying, here's what we're trying to solve, what do you all think about how we can get there, led to a partnership between New Leaders and Morehouse that is doing just that. When I was at the Mind Trust, we partnered with United Negro College Fund because they were doing a lot of work around how do they make sure that their work in getting students to and through college could actually be better, more effective by getting into the K-12 space. That partnership that we had with UNCF led to a lot of other conversations about how we can do our work better in areas that may not have been on our mind at the beginning. So I think teacher prep programs can be having those same type of conversations, knowing that diversifying their institutions and their the students they're producing is a priority. How do they build relationships within communities to do that?
I think you should look across, not just Indiana, but just across the United States, right? You can point to a lot of schools which are doing really, really amazing things for kids, and they're just sort of stellar places where you'd want to work. But there are also places, both in rural America and urban America, that schools are just not functioning well, right? They are challenging places for kids, challenging places for teachers. What do you think the role is of higher ed to maybe either improve those environments or maybe to prepare teachers to be able to work in those environments? Because and I don't think we ought to agree, you can't have a good school if you don't have good teachers. So is there a role in there for higher ed?
I think so. I mean, I think there is an opportunity, and I would think about it through maybe three different ways. One is to prepare teacher candidates to teach in a variety of environments. And I think diversity, equity, we didn't talk much during the earlier section of this conversation, we're talking about teacher prep, about diversity, equity, inclusion, and how important that is during a teacher candidate's training experience. Just recognizing the many lines of difference that a teacher is going to cross. One of those lines of difference is working with your principal, working with your colleagues. You know, that's a whole host of skills that can be developed. You know, when I was at Teach for America, we saw sort of a variance in teachers, and some that had a lot of sort of self-actualization, sort of like autonomy to go and say, how can I take this on myself to make changes in my school that make it better for everyone? What's my role? What's in my locus of control? I think, so that idea of locus of control. That being said, you know, I also just think another role for higher education is related to principal preparation. I feel like in many cases, the principal or the leader of the school has such opportunity for impact, setting the culture of the building, setting expectations, supporting teachers, and empowering them to lead in their classrooms and in their schools. So I think principal preparation is huge. That's another area that we at the Walton Family Foundation have significantly invested. And, you know, the final thing is I think that there are creative ways that higher ed can partner with districts and schools. And especially if it's, you know, a partnership where you're placing teacher candidates in school buildings, how else might you support those schools? And, you know, at ASU, they were actually partnering with some of the placement schools to do total redesign. So they brought in a design team and were supporting staff to actually redesign and rethink about the way that their school would be structured and implementing pilot ideas. But I think there's a whole host of ways that higher ed could partner with schools. And that, as Camila said, it really is kind of getting to know the community where you're working deeply, which I imagine most already do, but really then the next step of thinking like, well, what else might this look like? It's not really a traditional way of working together, but it's a real opportunity.
Yeah, and I would add, if you think about, Carrie, your question was about schools where things are not going so well. So there's going to be lots of factors that play into the not going so well, including management and finance factors. So if you think about a university or a college that might have a business school or a management center where they could perhaps come alongside a school or a district and partner with for some technical assistance and programming, it seems like that would be a natural way to try to help some of the struggling schools in which teachers, and it may have the added benefit of convincing those teachers to stay on longer than perhaps they might otherwise be inclined to. Because if they're in a dysfunctional environment, I wouldn't blame them for wanting to try to find a more productive environment in which to work.
So I think earlier, Claire, you were mentioning some reports that came out about the importance of effective principals and leadership. It's probably the Wallace Foundation report, right? And so, can you talk a bit about, what does creative or innovative teacher prep programming look like? How is it different than maybe what we've seen in the past?
Teacher prep or principal prep?
Principal prep, like
Principal prep. Okay. Yeah, we actually have been funding through the Mind Trust the participation of school leaders from Indianapolis, from charters, districts, and not just Center Township, but Marion County, to go participate in the National Principal Academy Fellowship through Relay. And what they have done, and they bring together traditional public and public charter school leaders in an intensive academy through the summer, and then support throughout the next school year to help really instill some of the principles that were behind the charter management organization that is Relay. And they've had incredibly high performing schools across their entire network. So what were some of the management practices that their principals learned and implemented to help those schools be so successful? And they've distilled that into this academy. And it's not just principals, it's also associate principals and those that are kind of in the pipeline. So they take a clustered approach to training and try to get maximum exposure within a building and a district or within a charter network, so that you're having lots of school leaders trained with the same principles. And it's around what are really basic things, which is how do you use data to drive instruction, and how to use the principal help set up your teachers to do that and be effective in doing that work. And that includes things like making sure you're building time into the schedule for them to have that preparation time and that collaboration time together. It's how do you manage adults effectively? How do you create a positive learning, a teaching environment for the adults in the building? So it's not like it's anything revolutionary, but what is revolutionary is that they've distilled really strong practices and they figured out a way to teach that at scale. So that's an example of something that we've been funding for. I think we've had 4 different grant rounds to help support that initiative.
One thing I'll just add to that, because I think that Relay is such a strong model that we've heard has been the most impactful of that programming, has been the opportunity to practice in real time and get feedback. And so it's concepts that are taught, and then it's like, okay, you do it. And you have some very senior level leaders who've been, been principals for years, being learners again and having to try something out, sharing feedback, how they would share feedback with a teacher that needed coaching, and then getting feedback themselves. And so it wasn't just the concept, it was trying it out, getting feedback, knowing how to do it better, that really allows it to transform their school buildings when they return.
Yeah, that art of giving feedback that comes across as constructive and helping the teacher to believe what you're trying to do is not tear them down, but build them up. I mean, that is easy to imagine in concept, hard to deliver in practicality, right? And so I think programs like that have an experiential component that allow you to kind of walk through and practice. I think those are oftentimes pretty impactful programs. So it's 2:45, so we're running short on time. I want to find out if there's any kind of closing comments or thoughts that each of you have before we close this up. Anything maybe we haven't talked about that we should have talked about. All right, well, I greatly appreciate your time. I appreciate you being willing to share about your work and the ideas that you have. I hope that it's been helpful and maybe spark some creative thoughts for everybody in the audience, the group. I think that there is, as much as there is challenge in getting us to a point where we have a teaching workforce that is more diverse, that is greater numbers, right? There's all these challenges you can point to, but I also think there's an awful lot of opportunity. And coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing huge injections of funding into schools, and it's my hope that that will have effect on the ecosystem, right? That helps us to be able to do things that we haven't been able to do in the past. And so I think the timing of this conversation is good. For everyone who is in the audience, there is an evaluation link, which is in the chat box. We encourage you to fill that out. And sort of as you think about what your needs are in teacher prep, if there are other topics or resources that you would want CEL to provide, we'd love to know about that. We have somebody from EdChoice who's with us. EdChoice is our sponsor who sponsored these events, and I think he's going to spend just a moment talking about how they might be able to help ed prep programs. So, Paul, I think you're on, right?
Hi, thanks, Carrie. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I don't want to spend too much more time. I know we're running really short, but I just wanted to say thank you to Carrie and Kate and Kylie and their team at CEL. We really appreciate your partnership and all the work that you put in developing and running this webinar series over the last few months. I mean, it's been terrific. The conversations have been great, and we've been learning a lot at EdChoice. I also want to express how grateful we are to the Walton Family Foundation and Fairbanks Foundation for their support over the years for our own outreach and research here in Indiana, which has been very helpful to us. And I mean, all three of your foundations are doing tremendous work in the Indianapolis area and beyond, and we really support your efforts and think really highly of all the work that you do. Just real quickly, just a little bit about EdChoice. We're a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We're located here in Indianapolis, so our office is in the Salesforce Tower, but the scope of our work is national. So we do a lot of work at the state and local levels with our partners. And so our mission at EdChoice is to support efforts around expansive freedom and opportunities in K-12 education, and particularly for students, their families, as well as educators. Thinking about that as a pathway to a successful life, and builds a stronger society. And at EdChoice, we have 5 different programs. And so I manage our research program, and then we have 4 others: training and outreach, communications and marketing, what we call focused state investment. And so we do a lot of state level outreach and work. We also have a legal affairs department too. And so we really, just in a nutshell, we'd love to hear from any of you to better understand, what changes you're seeing in this now, throughout the pandemic, what you see as changes in the ecosystem, which I heard a few times mentioned earlier, I think from Claire and Carrie. And that's a term, a concept that we're really thinking about more and more at EdChoice too, how the different stakeholder dynamics, sector dynamics, structural dynamics are really changing, and private, public-private partnerships. And so that's something we're thinking about more and more, but we'd love to hear from you. And we also want to be a resource for you for many of our programs, whether it's on the research side, communications trainings. And so, and I should mention that we just released, that might be of interest to some of the folks in the audience, that we just released a new quarterly national survey of teachers last week. And so that's something that we just started in 2020, and we'll continue to do each quarter a national survey of teachers across sector, so public district, public charter, as well as private school teachers. And what we're seeing is that there is this moment, it seems like there is a moment here where there's more appeal for flexibility and opportunities in K-12 education. And so that's something we'll continue to measure and keep track of. But we also like to talk to people face to face and in environments like this, whether it's virtually too on webinars, just to learn from your experiences. So thanks again to Carrie and CEL and all of you on the panel today. It's been really great.
Excellent, great. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.